Hello, I'm Erik and this is a little insight into my drawing process. I drew this picture in Photoshop with a Wacom bamboo tablet. The little green guy there is Master Chief. You might recognize him from the Halo games, as well as labels on various Mountain Dew products. Anyway, he'll be my subject matter today. Almost everything I do in Photoshop starts out as a sketch on paper. Once I've worked out a basic idea, I'll scan it or take a picture of it and load that into Photoshop. Drawing on a tablet while looking at a screen takes some getting used to, and having a sketch as a starting point really helps me. Once I have the sketch loaded up, I create a new layer and name it something to do with lines because that's where the basic line work is going to go. Next, I'll select a brush and start tracing over my sketch. I have a simple cartoony style, so I like to use a basic default brush with hard edges. With it, you can get a really thick, smooth line. Once I've finished the initial line work, I begin the process of laying in the basic colors. I start by duplicating the line layer, renaming the new layer something to do with basic colors, then repositioning it below the original line layer. Next, I'll pick the color I want, select the paint bucket, and use it to fill in the outline sections. Because I duplicated the line layer and used that copy for the basic color layer, when I use the paint bucket, the color knows where to stop. The only drawback to this method is that you end up with white or transparent outlines between your color and your line work. However, this is really easy to fix. Just take the brush tool and paint over the white space. Because the lines are on a layer above the color, you won't have to worry about painting over them. When I'm done laying in the basic colors, and the line work looks something like this, then I create a new layer above the basic colors and below the line work. On this layer, I'll paint in shadows and highlights. Also, this layer will be all brushwork with no paint bucket, so it will start out as just a blank new layer. Nothing needs to be duplicated. When I'm happy with all the shadows and highlights, I'll throw in one final layer directly above the one I was just working on. On this layer, I'll just add a few little details to the Chief's visor. Now that the little guy is complete, I need to draw a second one with his back to me. The process for creating this one is exactly the same as the first, tracing the sketch, filling in the colors, and adding shading and little details. After the figures are done, I'll start building up the background with simple shapes, in this case just rectangles. To rotate them, I use the Free Transform tool. If you hold Shift while rotating, the object will snap to preset angles. This helps when you want separate objects rotated to the same angle. You can also quickly copy objects by holding Option on the Mac or Alt on PC, clicking on the object and dragging it somewhere else on the page. When I finished laying out the basic wall and floor, I selected all the wall layers and merged them into one, so that later I can easily put effects on the whole thing. With the walls roughed in, I'll start working on the stuff outside the windows. For the planet, I'll start with an ellipse, then experiment with various brushes to create some texture. The planet and the moon can be drawn very heavy-handedly because I'm going to blur them, so most of the detail would be lost anyway. To do that, select the layer you want, go up to Filter, Blur, and then Gaussian Blur. From there you can play with the settings until you're happy with how it looks. I also threw a black layer behind everything to make it look like space. With that done, I'll return to the walls and floor to add detail. For the floor, I use the Magic Wand tool to select it, then choose a gradient that goes from black to transparent and apply it to the floor. Without first using the Magic Wand tool to select a specific area, the gradient will be applied to the entire layer, so don't skip that step. The walls are a little more complicated, but it's still pretty simple stuff. First, I use the Rectangle Shape tool to add some extra details in the form of the yellow bars and some gray blocks to angle the corners on the windows. Next, I use the Magic Wand tool again to select the gray wall. With that selected, I'll add a gradient adjustment layer to the wall layer. When you do that, it gives you several options. The gradient should be black to transparent, and the layer style should be linear. Now you can use the little angle wheel to pick a direction for your gradient to go. Then, if you uncheck the Align with Layer box, you can click and drag to position your gradient just where you want it. For this project, I did this step 3 more times to add gradients to the wall at different angles. Next, I use the Rectangle Shape tool again to create some simple windowsills, which I place behind the wall and in front of the planet. I then use the same gradient adjustment layer technique as before to add some shading to the windowsills. To further separate the windowsills from the wall, I added a stroke to the wall layer. To do that, I selected the wall layer, went up to Edit, then Stroke Outline Selection. I made the stroke black with a width of 40 pixels and located it on the outside of the object. Next, I used the Shape tool to add black bars on top of the yellow bars, then positioned all of them directly below the gradient adjustment layers on the wall. For the convenience of everyone in my class, I did the last few parts on my Mac. With the exception of grouping the layers, everything I'm doing will still work in Photoshop Elements, so unless you're OCD about organization, you'll be fine. To make the window look more like a window, I'm going to add some gradient adjustment layers to the background stuff. With the layer directly below the window sills selected, add 2 gradient adjustment layers. Both will be white to transparent. One will start at the top of the page and one will start at the bottom of the page, and both will go towards the transparency in the middle. Now just lower the opacity for each layer. For me, the top was about 40 and the bottom was about 50. Now I'll finally use the guy I demoed to start. First, I'll use the Move tool to position him by the window. Next, I'll use the Free Transform tool to rotate him slightly and shrink him a little bit. Keep in mind, when you resize something, always hold the Shift key to make sure it retains its original shape and doesn't get skewed. Next, I'll place his layer between the wall and the windowsills. Then I'll lower his opacity to around 40 and test out a few blending modes. In this case, soft light looked the best, so that's what I used. Finally, I'll make a really simple shadow at the Chief's feet. All you have to do is use the Shape tool to make an ellipse, throw a Gaussian blur on it, and lower its opacity. I used the same effect to make the rectangular shadows on the floor. So that's how I made this whole picture. If you have any questions, hit me up in class or just post a comment below, and I will try to find an answer for you. Thanks for watching.